It was a typical Saturday evening at one of the city's most upscale restaurants, a place where the wealthy and elite dined under shimmering chandeliers and soft classical music played in the background. The staff moved gracefully between tables, attending to their guests with precision and professionalism. Among them was Lena, a young black waitress who had worked at the restaurant for over 2 years. She was known for her quiet demeanor, polite nature, and exceptional attention to detail. Lena's shift that evening started like any other. She greeted patrons with a warm smile and ensured their needs were met. Despite the busy environment, Lena exuded a calmness that impressed her colleagues and even some regular customers. However, tonight, an unexpected guest would change the course of her life forever. At one of the large round tables near the center of the room sat a group of well-dressed men and women. Among them was Harold Sterling, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for arrogance and a penchant for showing off his status. Harold was known in social circles for his blunt, often condescending remarks and his tendency to belittle those he deemed beneath him. Harold's booming voice carried across the dining room as he entertained his companions with exaggerated stories of his business conquests. The others laughed, though some did so nervously, clearly uncomfortable with his attitude. Lena, who had just served the table their drinks, overheard snippets of his conversation. She tried to focus on her tasks, but Harold's remarks were impossible to ignore. "These people have no idea how lucky they are," Harold declared, swirling his glass of wine. "I mean, look at this place. Can you imagine how many of them have ever seen a piano like that, let alone touched one?" Harold gestured toward the grand piano at the corner of the restaurant. It was a decorative piece, rarely used except on special occasions when the restaurant hired professional musicians to play. His companions chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. One of the women at the table attempted to change the subject, but Harold wasn't finished. "Take that waitress, for example," he continued, his gaze shifting toward Lena. "Do you think she even knows what to do with a piano? Or is it just another thing out of her reach?" Lena froze for a moment, her tray balanced carefully in her hands. She wasn't sure if Harold was talking about her specifically, but the direction of his gaze left little doubt. Swallowing her pride, she continued with her work, refusing to let his words get to her. But Harold wasn't done. As Lena returned to the table to refill their water glasses, he addressed her directly. "Miss, do you play the piano?" Caught off guard, Lena looked up at him. "I've played before, sir," she said politely, though her tone was cautious. Harold smirked. "Oh, really? Why don't you show us? I'd love to see what someone like you can do on an instrument like that." The dining room grew quiet as nearby patrons turned their attention to the exchange. Lena felt the weight of their gazes, a mix of curiosity and sympathy. She hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I'm here to work, sir," Lena replied, her voice calm but firm. Harold leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "Come on, don't be shy. If you're as good as you say, you should have no problem entertaining us for a few minutes, or are you afraid you'll embarrass yourself?" The challenge in his tone was clear. Lena glanced around the room, noticing how many people were now watching. She could feel her cheeks burning with a mix of anger and humiliation, but she refused to let Harold see her falter. After a moment, she took a deep breath and said, "If it will make you happy, sir, I'll play." Harold's smug expression didn't waver as Lena walked toward the piano. The room was silent, all eyes on her as she took her seat at the bench. For Harold, this was just another opportunity to assert his dominance, to prove his belief that wealth and privilege always prevailed. But for Lena, this was a moment to rise above the insult, to show not just Harold, but everyone in the room who she truly was. As her fingers hovered above the keys, she closed her eyes and took another deep breath. This wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about reclaiming her dignity. And when she began to play, the entire room was about to witness something extraordinary. Lena's fingers moved with grace and precision, dancing across the piano keys like they belonged there. The room, which had been filled with murmurs and clinking silverware just moments before, was now utterly silent. The first notes she played were soft and measured, a melody so hauntingly beautiful that it seemed to cast a spell over the restaurant. The diners, including Harold and his companions, sat in stunned silence. No one had expected this. The sound pouring from the piano was not the hesitant playing of an amateur, but the masterful performance of someone deeply connected to the music. Each note carried emotion, pain, hope, joy, and it resonated with everyone in the room. Lena had learned to play the piano as a child, taught by her late grandmother, who had been a musician herself. Growing up in a modest household, Lena found solace in music. The piano became her escape, her sanctuary, and her voice. Though life had pulled her away from it, her passion for the instrument had never faded. As her performance continued, the piece grew more complex. Her hands moved faster, and the music swelled with intensity. The audience couldn't take their eyes off her, captivated by the unexpected display of talent. Some diners began to whisper to each other, their expressions shifting from surprise to admiration. At the table, Harold Sterling sat frozen, his smug smirk replaced with an expression of disbelief. He had expected to humiliate Lena, to use her as the butt of his joke. Instead, he found himself at the center of a moment he couldn't control. His companions exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. "She's incredible," one of them whispered, breaking the silence at the table. Harold didn't respond. For the first time that evening, he was at a loss for words. As Lena neared the end of the piece, the music softened again, returning to the same haunting melody with which she had begun. Her fingers lingered on the final note, letting it fade into the air like the end of a dream. For a moment, there was silence. Then, as if on cue, the entire restaurant erupted into applause. Diners rose to their feet, clapping and cheering for Lena, who stood from the piano bench with a humble bow. The sound of the applause filled the room, but Lena's eyes remained focused on Harold. He looked stunned, his face a mix of shock and something else, perhaps shame. The tables had turned in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," Lena said softly, addressing the room before returning to her duties. As she walked back toward the kitchen, her heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't played in years, and the vulnerability of performing in front of such a crowd had been terrifying. But the applause and the looks of admiration reminded her why she loved music in the first place. Back at the table, Harold's companions turned their attention to him. One of the women leaned forward and said, "Looks like you underestimated her, Harold." Harold forced a laugh, but it was clear the moment had rattled him. For the rest of the evening, he remained unusually quiet, his arrogance replaced by a subdued demeanor. The man who had sought to humiliate Lena had been silenced, not by harsh words or confrontation, but by the undeniable power of her talent. Little did Lena know, this was only the beginning. Her performance that evening had set into motion events that would change her life forever, and Harold Sterling, despite his initial intentions, would play an unexpected role in her journey. The following morning, the incident at the restaurant became the talk of the town. Customers who had witnessed Lena's performance couldn't stop raving about her talent, and word spread quickly through social media and word of mouth. Videos of Lena playing the piano began to circulate online, with captions like, "Waitress stuns restaurant with incredible piano performance and hidden talent uncovered in the most unexpected way." Within hours, the clips gained thousands of views, then tens of thousands. Lena had no idea this was happening. She arrived at the restaurant early, ready for another long shift. Though she felt a flicker of pride for standing up to Harold in her own way, she dismissed the previous night as a fleeting moment of courage. Life, after all, had taught her not to dwell too long on victories. When she walked into the kitchen, her manager Karen greeted her with a wide smile. "You're famous, Lena!" she exclaimed, holding up her phone to show Lena one of the videos. Lena froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's you, sweetie," Karen said. "Some of the customers recorded you playing last night, and now you're blowing up online." Lena's stomach flipped. She wasn't sure whether to feel excited or terrified. Her private moment of defiance had become a public spectacle. She worried about how this might affect her job, or worse, invite unwanted scrutiny. As the day progressed, the restaurant saw an unusual influx of customers. People came not just for the food, but to meet Lena, the waitress turned piano virtuoso. Many brought up the video, asking her questions about her background and if she had plans to pursue music professionally. At first, Lena felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had spent most of her life blending into the background, avoiding the spotlight. But as more people approached her with genuine admiration and encouragement, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. By mid-afternoon, the restaurant was buzzing with energy when an unexpected guest walked through the door: Harold Sterling. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he looked entirely out of place amidst the casual lunchtime crowd. The moment he entered, conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to him. Lena spotted him immediately and felt her chest tighten. She hadn't expected to see him again, especially not so soon. What was he doing here? Harold scanned the room until his gaze landed on her. For a moment, he hesitated, then walked directly toward her. Lena straightened, bracing herself for whatever insult or condescension he had prepared. When he reached her, he paused, looking uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "Lena," he began, his voice softer than she remembered. "I owe you an apology." Lena blinked, caught off guard. "An apology?" she repeated, her tone skeptical. Harold nodded, his expression earnest. "I was out of line last night. I acted like a fool, and I deeply regret it. Your performance was extraordinary, and I should have acknowledged that instead of belittling you." The restaurant fell silent as everyone strained to hear the exchange. Lena could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting for her reaction. "I appreciate the apology," she said carefully, her voice steady. "But what you did wasn't just rude. It was hurtful. You didn't see me as a person. You saw me as someone you could mock." Harold winced, her words hitting their mark. "You're right," he admitted. "I was arrogant and thoughtless. But your talent, it humbled me. I'd like to make amends, if you'll let me." Lena raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. How exactly? Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I own a chain of entertainment venues," he explained. "Theaters, concert halls, that sort of thing. I'd like to offer you a chance to play at one of our venues. A real concert with a proper audience. I'll cover all the expenses and you'll keep the earnings." The room erupted into murmurs of astonishment. Lena stared at the card in his hand, torn between disbelief and suspicion. Was this genuine, or just another ploy to ease his guilt? "I'll think about it," she said finally, taking the card but not committing to anything. Harold nodded, seeming to understand her hesitation. "Take all the time you need," he said, before turning to leave. As he walked out, the restaurant buzzed with speculation and excitement. Lena's co-workers surrounded her, urging her to accept the offer. But Lena remained quiet, staring at the card in her hand. That night, she sat in her small apartment, the card resting on the table in front of her. She thought about her grandmother, about the sacrifices her family had made, and about the music she had almost abandoned. The opportunity was daunting, but so was the thought of staying where she was, letting her talent go to waste. Harold's offer might have been unexpected, but it was also a door she never thought would open. The next day, Lena arrived at the restaurant with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She had spent the night thinking about Harold's offer, weighing her fears against the possibilities. In the end, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Never let fear keep you from living your truth." When Harold's assistant called later that morning to follow up, Lena surprised herself by saying, "Yes, I'll do it." The assistant sounded genuinely thrilled, and within hours, arrangements were underway. Harold had already booked a concert hall for the following weekend, and a professional team was being assembled to support Lena's performance. News of Lena's upcoming concert spread quickly. Social media lit up with excitement as more people discovered the viral video of her impromptu performance. Local news stations picked up the story, dubbing her the waitress virtuoso. Lena was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, but she also felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. Harold, true to his word, ensured everything was handled with professionalism. He visited Lena at the restaurant to check on her progress, and though their interactions were polite, there was still an air of unease between them. Lena couldn't forget the humiliation he had caused, but she reminded herself that this was about her dream, not him. As the concert date approached, Lena threw herself into rehearsals. She practiced late into the night, refining her technique and building her confidence. Her co-workers and friends rallied around her, offering encouragement and reminding her of her extraordinary gift. When the night of the concert finally arrived, Lena stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The concert hall was packed with people, including many who had seen the viral video and wanted to witness her talent in person. Harold was seated in the front row, his expression unreadable. Lena took a deep breath as the announcer introduced her. The audience erupted in applause as she walked onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the grand piano. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the noise and the nerves. When she began to play, the world seemed to fade away. The music flowed from her fingertips, filling the hall with a raw, emotional power that left the audience spellbound. Each note carried a piece of her story, her struggles, her dreams, her resilience. When the final note echoed through the hall, the audience erupted into a standing ovation. Lena rose from the piano bench, tears streaming down her face as she took in the overwhelming response. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as a waitress or a struggling musician, but as an artist. Harold approached her after the concert, his expression softening. "Lena," he said, his voice sincere, "you were incredible. Thank you for giving me the chance to help share your talent with the world." Lena nodded, her emotions too raw to say much. "Thank you," she managed, knowing this moment was about more than just his redemption. It was about her reclaiming her voice. In the weeks that followed, offers poured in for Lena to perform at other venues. She left her job at the restaurant and dedicated herself fully to her music. Harold, true to his word, continued to support her career without asking for anything in return. Though their paths were unlikely to cross again, Lena knew she would never forget the night that changed her life. It wasn't just about the music or the recognition. It was about proving to herself that she was worthy of her dreams.